Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering the woke boycotts. Woke boycotts have created panic at companies. They are dropping their propaganda. There are more companies that are afraid of becoming the next Budlight or Target, and it's actually pretty serious. We're seeing a lot of movement. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from one of the most woke sources I could possibly find, from Vox, the conservative boycott playbook is kind of working. And you know, they don't want to admit that it's working. There are still other publications that still say, oh, it's no really big deal. There's no guarantee that Bud Light's going to stay where it is. Target really wasn't affected that badly. No, it is very bad. And when you see a publication like Vox admitting how bad it is and explaining how they're starting to figure out how they can back out of this situation because they lost so badly, it's a really good sign. From Bud Light to Target, right-wing anger at woke capitalism is scaring corporate America. The general rule about consumer boycotts is that they rarely work, at least in terms of taking a real bite out of a company's bottom line. This year, though, the boycott outlook in the United States has been a little different. Conservative consumers and normal people specifically have been able to do some severe damage. Bud Light's decision to embark on a small-scale marketing campaign with transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney sparked a vast outrage on the right and with normal people this spring. It cost the company millions of dollars in sales, actually hundreds of millions of dollars of sales, almost $400 million in just 3 months, and ultimately contributed to Bud Light's dethroning as the most popular beer in the country. And again, it's very interesting that they admit it, because you see in other sources, CNN still trying to push it, saying, well, you know, there was a shift in what people were consuming. Modelo was catching up anyway. Bud Light was sort of on the decline. Sure, those things are kind of true, but the truth is, the boycotts absolutely crushed these companies, and now they're stepping back in line. Then, over the summer, conservatives took aim at Target and its annual Pride collection. Many called for a boycott of the retailer, and some consumers took to going into Target stores to destroy displays. These are the LGBT displays. There were some that were knocked down. They weren't destroyed. In fact, Target wound up destroying all of them themselves and throwing them in their shredders. Target's earnings were down for the second quarter. While the Pride backlash wasn't the only main issue in play, in an earnings call, a company executive cited, quote, the strong reaction to this year's Pride assortment as headwinds during the period. Target now says it's going to pause, adapt, and learn so that its future approach to Pride balances celebration, inclusivity, and broad-based appeal. Neither brand is in dire straits, but they would probably much rather not be in this position. Bud Light is in dire straits. The brand is absolutely shrinking. It's not going to be on the store shelves in the way that it used to be, because they're losing a lot of shelf space at the same time as other companies, and there are many other companies, not just this one, like Ultra Right. He's now getting his beer out in the southern states, and they're actually going to physically be on thousands of store shelves. Great success story. Of course, also Bud Light has lost as much as $27 billion in market value of their stock. That is incredibly serious. Conservatives aren't winning every battle with corporate America. I'm signed up for a service called Woke Alerts that supposedly tells me every so-called woke company I'm supposed to boycott, and it feels like it's a little bit of all of them. However, it does appear that they're onto something with some fronts. They are managing to hit a few companies where it hurts, at least somewhat, on their balance sheets, and are getting them to change their behavior. The energy on the right is having a chilling effect across corporate America. Activists have a figurative gun they want to keep hunting, and CEOs know it. This is interesting. Sounds like it's worth signing up for Woke Alerts. I'm not signed up to these guys yet, but it seems like it's worth it just to kind of keep up on what's going on. There is no concrete unified theory of why this recent string of right-wing outrage is hitting companies differently as of late, but it's somewhat helpful to look at the boycotted brands themselves. For one thing, and not to be rude to Bud Light here, but it's not the most awesome tasting beer. Most importantly, it's really easy to swap out for another similarly not most awesome tasting beer like Coors Light and Miller Lite, which is what many consumers seem to be doing. Yeah, people just switched brands, and you can do that especially with any kind of consumer product where there's someone else that's making the consumer product. The companies might own the brand, but they don't own the customer. They have to keep earning the customer every time they put out the product and every time they promote and market the product. That's where these guys went wrong. Quote, Bud Light seems to be the most maximally substitutable beverage on earth, said Jerry Davis, a professor of management at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business, though he did express surprise at what happened. Quote, the Bud Light event really did take down the sales of America's most popular beer, and I really can't think of a comparable event in the past. There are likely a variety of factors in play here. The right is energized and focused. While there have been calls for boycotts of other companies in recent months that have not been so successful, Chick-fil-A, Miller Lite, activists have been able to get people to coalesce around a handful of specific actions and brands. Quote, historically, boycotts haven't worked. They've been too diffuse, said Maurice Schweitzer, a Wharton professor who focuses on behavioral decisions research, emotion, and negotiations. I think what seems to have changed is that, first of all, it's more focused, so it's Bud Light and Target. It hasn't been a lot of other companies. And the second thing that's really different is that people are motivated and coordinated. In May, influential right-wing commentator Matt Walsh was quite open about the strategy on the platform formerly known as Twitter. We don't need to boycott every woke company, he wrote. Pick a few strategic targets. Make them pay dearly. That's enough to make wokeness a lot less appealing to the corporate world. Stop trying to bring down the whole line of dominoes all at once. Start with one and then the next. Matt Walsh was very influential and very helpful, and he's definitely a part of why this has worked out. The culture wars of the moment are likely a contributing factor here. Namely, conservatives are united around pushing back against the transgender visibility and rights and pushing of transgenderism everywhere in society all at once, in schools, in church, at work, in business, everywhere. It's a hot button issue, and there's a lot of frenetic sentiment around within the GOP. Quote, conservatives at the moment are more unified as a group of politically active people than liberals are, especially on the trans issue, said Braden King, a professor of management and organizations at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. The big issue with Bud Light is they rebranded it as Dylan Mulvaney's beer. They put Dylan Mulvaney's face on a can. They claim they weren't planning on distributing cans with Dylan's face on it, and that's fine, but they made it appear that they were going to do that. When they did that, that was really enough for most people to just say, you know what? No, you're not doing something I'm interested in. You've made this a transgender beer, and as a result, no, people don't want to drink that if they're not into the whole transgender thing. That's not to say liberals don't care about trans rights, but they're not as energized over it, and they're not as in lockstep as conservatives are. All the different groups and viewpoints in the Democrats' big tent make it harder to organize, especially when Donald Trump, a unifying force for the left, is no longer in the White House. Quote, if he's not there to fight against, it's not clear to me what they all have in common, King said. When Trump was elected, there was an effort to boycott and pressure companies with ties to him and his businesses as part of the hashtag Grab Your Wallet campaign. It's not clear it did much financially to the companies it targeted, except for Ivanka Trump. It was a lot of companies to keep track of. However, it did generate a lot of attention and publicity. Part of this is the nature of the Republican Party, which historically has been a more monolithic group and has become angrier in recent years as they've been under attack constantly. Democrats and liberals tend to be less homogenous, less coordinated, less easy to identify with a single issue, Schweitzer said. Quote, Trump has changed the Republican Party in a very fundamental way to be much more about identity, much more about grievance, and it's been very powerfully motivating. Well, you know, he's just identifying, Trump, that if you're going to attack people, they don't have to put up with it anymore. And the progressive agenda is to constantly attack and push and attack and push and attack and push and attack and push. And sure, people don't want that for themselves, and they don't want that for their children, and they're not going to support companies that support that. The environment makes it easier to get people wound up about Target's Pride collection, for example, even though said collection has been around for years. That collection has not been around for years. They have more than 2,000 items this year in their Target collection. They also put it in the front of all their stores so that everyone had to deal with all of their stuff as soon as you walked into the store. People were not having it. Much of this has been put on overdrive by social media, allowing people to coordinate in ways they haven't been able to in the past. It's fueled by the conservative media complex and some misinformation. There's also an element of violence to this that is quite unique and disturbing. Target's stated reasoning for pulling back on its Pride collection has in part been to protect the safety of its employees. Quote, that's something that you can't really just wave away, Davis said. Yeah, the safety of their employees. In the meantime, there are woke people calling in bomb threats to Targets all across the country. but they never mention that in these articles. The intensity among right-leaning consumers isn't just negative, with people turning away from brands. There is an addictive element to it as well, adding to some bottom lines and not just taking away. The film Sound of Freedom, which is about child sex trafficking, has been a hit among conservative and normal people's audiences and ranked in the tens of millions of dollars as a result. Conservatives have also been able to drive controversial country songs such as Jason Aldean's Try That in a Small Town and Oliver Anthony's Rich Men North of Richmond up the charts. The situation is a little novel and companies don't quite know what to do about it. The ripple effects of conservative consumer activism are real. If you're a CEO sitting in your office today contemplating how you're going to approach political and cultural issues, the threat of conservative activists coming for you has to be in the back of your mind. As much as your employees, customers, and even perhaps personal politics may be pushing you to the left, there's a risk that your firm could be next. Nobody wants to be the next Bud Light or Target or even Disney, which hasn't seen a real hit to its business since criticizing Florida's Don't Say Gay law, but also probably would rather not be dealing with Ron DeSantis. Of course, the problem that Disney has right now is their stock is dropping to an all-time low. Their business is completely falling apart because of the stupid woke agenda they've been pushing, but they also have some very serious business problems. Disney is now hearing from their cable distributors for their cable channels they are not interested in the same deal they used to be getting because only around 25% of people who subscribe to cable channels actually utilize any of the Disney content. And the cable companies are starting to ask for a new deal. This is just from today. Charter Cable wants to blow up the pay TV bundle in their Disney fight. This is not a typical carriage dispute. So what they want to do is they want to have some kind of a hybrid deal that includes Disney Plus, and they don't want to pay the kind of billions they've been paying for Disney's content. This is such a serious threat to Disney, it can't be overstated. But Disney is still busy dealing with, at the same time as dealing with severe business problems. The nature of the modern market is that companies are supposed to focus on profits and delivering shareholder value. Most firms that profess to embrace progressive values do so because at the very least they think it won't hurt their business and instead hope it will help. If the scenario shifts, so does their behavior. Corporate executives have stopped talking as much about sustainability and diversity efforts in public forums. As the Wall Street Journal notes, mentions of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, on earnings calls declined steeply between this year and last. In June, Larry Fink, the CEO of investing firm BlackRock, said he had stopped using the term ESG because it had become too politicized. Quote, it's been entirely weaponized by the far left and weaponized by the far right, he said. He added that BlackRock was still committed to talking to companies about issues such as decarbonization and social concerns. Still, it's a different tone from a guy who in 2018 declared that, quote, society is demanding that companies, both public and private, serve a social purpose. Companies don't really need to be serving a social purpose other than their normal social purpose, which is to produce quality products, quality services, take care of their customers, take care of their employees, and take care of their investors. Pushing the woke left agenda is not necessary, but even more so, it's pretty obvious that companies that fool around with this take tremendous chances with their business. And you also don't know, even with a company like Anheuser-Busch that screwed up on Bud Light, are they going to screw up on another brand? Are they going to make other business decisions that have nothing to do with improving their profitability? Is Disney ever going to bounce back and say, okay, we don't need to be woke now. We actually do need to solve what the problem is going to be with our cable companies, because this pushback from this cable company is very serious and it just came up today. Disney knows they're ultimately not going to be able to continue to get the money they have been getting for years out of these cable companies, but it's hitting them like literally today it just hit. Nobody was expecting it to come this soon. Companies are backing off, they're getting more focused on business, and they're dropping the propaganda. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.